Hello, I'm Larry, and I am still your host of the Science Fiction Divide. Today I'm going to talk about a movie that I personally like, that a lot of people that would say it's not science fiction. In fact, I'd even be hard-pressed to count it as science fiction, but I thought it best illustrates the point I wanted to make in today's episode. That would be 2004's Butterfly Effect. Butterfly Effect is a movie about controlling one's fate. We all have things in our life that we could look back and say, I really wish that didn't happen. In this movie, we have somebody who had multiple times in his life he looked back and say, I really wish this didn't happen, and had the ability to go back and change those events. But in doing so, in an attempt to play God and control his fate, control destiny, control the past, and to make things better for everybody, in the process, he screws it all up. We see this theme show up again and again, not only in world literature, many different movies as well. There's a German movie called Run Lola Run that discusses the concept of a butterfly effect. Now, to understand what a butterfly effect is, the saying goes, if I remember correctly, the flap of a butterfly's wings can cause a typhoon halfway around the world. Now, it's not a provable theory, it's a philosophical concept. Time will only happen one way, but by doing little things here and there, you're affecting other things along the way. Run Lola Run is a prime example of this. It's a German movie, late 1990s, I believe, where a woman has an event that takes her through the remainder of the story. And at the end of the story, they flash back to the very beginning of the movie, and instead of her, I believe it was stepping over a dog, she trips over the dog. And then the movie carries forth with a completely different ending, and all the events that happen during the day are different. Then that movie ends and starts again, except this time, instead of her stepping over the dog, she walks around the dog, and the movie changes again, showing that something so inconsequential as whether you stepped over a dog or stepped around a dog or tripped over the dog can have drastic consequences for the remainder of the day, and as you would follow forth, the remainder of your life. And the events that changed in your life would then affect the people around you, the events around you. In theory, if I were to hold my breath for a second, I've just changed the course of human events over the next millions of years. I could have, say, breathed in bacteria that might have killed someone else, that my immune system could have handled. But by holding it in, I killed it. If I had just breathed it out, it gets back into the atmosphere, somebody else dies, or they get sick, those events change the people's lives around them, and so on and so on. But we have no control over these things. Events are going to happen one way or the other, regardless of what we do. Yet in this movie, because the main character, Evan, had the opportunity to go back and change events that happened in his life, things happened, a butterfly effect was triggered, and he could actually remember all these other lives, but nobody else could.
That you were happy once. With me.
You know, there's one major hole in your story. There's no fucking way on this planet or any other I would ever be in some fucking sorority.
So as the movie goes on, he goes back and changes again and again. He has memories of all the different lives he led, and his friends led, and his family led, but they have no concept. You could say that he was interdimensionally traveling, but that's going in a science fiction explanation, where you could say this was more of a fantasy explanation. Now, why is this important? The concept of control over our lives, control over other people's lives, control of destiny, from a psychological standpoint, is, for lack of a better term, it's crazy. The more we try to control ourselves, the more we try to control others, the more we can try to control our environment, the less control we really have. There's a book that I like to reference. It's a book called Flow. The book's been around for a while.
Oh, yeah.
author was Mikhail, I'm going to butcher this last name, Kazansmith McMihaly. Print. There we go. Anyway, this book was like the quintessential, as far as I was concerned, book on what truly brings happiness into a person's life. And what he talks about in the book is what he discovered about happiness. What I discovered was that happiness is not something that happens. It is not the result of good fortune or random chance. It is not something that money can buy or power command. It does not happen on outside events, but rather on how we interpret them. Happiness is in fact a condition that must be prepared for, cultivated, and defended privately by each person. People who learn to control inner experience will be able to determine the quality of their lives, which is as close to any of us can come to being happy. Not controlling events, but how we interpret them. In the movie The Butterfly Effect, Evan tries to control. And what you find, the more control you try to achieve, the less you actually have.
You can't play God, son.
You can look at the Star Wars movie when Princess Leia says to Tarkin, the more you tighten your grip, Tarkin, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. She's correct. The more you try to control, the less you actually have. Now, I've mentioned in prior videos, I am a substance abuse counselor. I work in a substance abuse clinic. I talk extensively in my groups about happiness. There is a vast difference between feeling good and being happy. Many clients that I talk to will mention how they are happy using drugs. My response is, you cannot pursue happiness. You cannot try to be happy. Happiness is a result of a lifestyle decision and choices that you have made. I can feel good using drugs. I assume heroin is awesome. I've seen enough people talk about it to know I'm sure it feels great.
It's like a feeling of love, like that love that will never, that doesn't go away.
But right after you do it, it's just, it comes over your whole body, and your whole body just gets warm and relaxed, and it's just like,
It is the single best, worst feeling you'll ever have in your life.
I have yet to meet anyone who was happy from what I understand as a concept of happiness as a result of using heroin. In fact, you follow through, if you're in a substance abuse clinic, something went horribly wrong. There's consequences to those actions of using drugs, of using alcohol, of chasing something that you think, if I do this, I will be happy. Typically, and again, my experience, and also there are plenty of biblical references, philosophical references, historical references, and so on, about what truly brings people happiness. Now, this is individual from person to person, but typically what I've noticed is what brings people happiness the most is the servitude of others, the fulfillment of dreams, the ability to look back and say, wow, I did it. I did that. In the process of doing that, whatever that is, typically people don't report, that made me happy. But look, just like he said, it's how we interpret those events that makes us happy. The more of those events, whatever they are to you as an individual, to look back on and say, I can't believe I did that, or I accomplished this, this, and this, the happier we'll be. As our life goes on, the fewer of those things that we have to reflect on and say, I did this, this, and this, and wow, that was incredible, the less happy we are. The more control we try to achieve, the more we look back and say, I wish I could change those events. If you've seen my Dune video, I talk a little bit about the morality of God and fate. that what if, no matter how bad things are, and bad is a subjective term, of course, this is the best we could do. In this movie, Evan goes back to try to change a friend's molestation, another friend's body being damaged by an explosion. Many things that we would look back and say, those are horrible things. What if those were the best possible things that could have happened, because it could have always been worse? And what Evan learns throughout the course of the movie, no matter how hard he tries to fix the bad, it can always be worse. And every time he tries to go back, it gets worse. Now, I'm not saying that the child with cancer, the person who watches horribly bad things happen to his community, a child brought up in the midst of war, I'm not saying, well, if they only look at the bright side of this, because that sounds naive, foolish, and silly. But it's important to remember that no matter how bad things are for yourself or for other individuals, it can be worse.
Could be worse.
It's worse.
I'm not saying that one should be grateful for the horrible things that have happened, but there was a book by Viktor Frankl. This book was quintessential in understanding existential dilemmas, man's search for meaning. And what Viktor Frankl discusses in that book is how he made sense of his life and what he was able to get from being a Jew during the Holocaust. He traveled through the camp system. He went to Auschwitz. He went to Buchenwald. I believe he was in Chemnitz. I'm not sure. The camps are not necessary as to know he spent years in the camp system. And he was able to make the most of that situation when he came out to discuss what suffering means to a person and why we have to do it. In suffering, we find the meaning of life. According to Viktor Frankl's concepts, the meaning of life is suffering. By suffering, you can appreciate your happiness. The person that doesn't suffer in life, the person that's handed everything, the person that has that life that we all, well, some of us, fantasize, I wish I had that person's life. Life would be fantastic. They don't seem to suffer. In not suffering, we cannot appreciate the good that comes along. We cannot appreciate the kindness, the happiness. To be given everything means to appreciate nothing. For the person who has nothing, who has every disadvantage in life, whose life appears to be an example to others of don't let this happen to you, if and or when things do go their way, they will appreciate it a lot more because their lows in life were much lower than someone else's. Again, I don't mean to come across as naive or to belittle an event. Again, as a counselor, I hear some really horrible stuff. Stuff that I can look at and go, I'm glad this has not happened to me in my life. However, on some level, I'm kind of envious. They've hit lows that I will never experience, or hopefully never experience. And in doing so, when they get things back in their life, they will appreciate them far more than I probably ever will. What he says about happiness, and this is something I can relate to, and maybe you might be able to too, is that the events in life that we will look back on and say, that made me happy, happen in two ways in the moment. One, they feel as though they are lasting forever. So, say a wedding, the birth of a child, winning the lotto, if that's what makes you happy. Going to college and learning the things you're going to need to learn for the rest of your life. In the moment, it will feel like it is taking forever, in a good way. It will also simultaneously feel instantaneous. It will feel like you have no idea. How long did that last? Was that an hour? Was it a day? My master's program lasted 5 years. In the process of educating myself, it felt like it was forever. 5 years, oh my God, how long is 5 years? Looking back, it was instantaneous. It was over in a flash. It wasn't nearly long enough. I loved going to class. I loved learning all the things that I was going to need to prepare myself for my career and ostensibly for the rest of my life. That's happiness. I could look back and say those were some of the best years of my life. I could say the same thing about my military career. It felt like it was taking forever. In a good way, I enjoyed my time. In the same instant, it was over. And how did that happen? Happiness is not something you can chase, though. Happiness isn't something that you can plan for. It just has to happen. In doing so, time stretches and shrinks, and retrospectively, we look back, and it's how we view the event or events that determines what we take from it. In the end of the movie, The Butterfly Effect, there's two endings. The theatrical ending, which was a much more Hollywood ending. The main character, Evan, goes back repeatedly to save the girl/woman he cared about, Kylie. At the end of the movie, he goes back to a point at a birthday party when he first meets her and he says something horrible to her and she walks away crying. And the presumption is that they have no relationship at all since then. She grows up, things happen, she lives a happy, from what it looks like during the montage scene, life, and then by a happenstance moment they pass each other like what's the term? Ships passing in the night, except it's in a busy city, and they stop for a moment and look back at each other and then continue walking, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've seen the movie. We presume he remembers who she is, and it's possible that she remembers who he is, but the last time she saw him he was 6. The cut version, the alternate ending, I think is a far more dramatic ending, a far more satisfying ending, and yet I can see why they cut it, because it is a very horribly depressing ending, where he goes back to while he's about to be born. You know, his mother's in hospital, she's giving birth, and he wraps his umbilical cord around his neck and strangles himself. Again, not a terribly happy ending, but what he learned in the course of the movie was, I can't change. What he learned in the course of the movie is, I cannot control events. And in giving up control, the presumption is things were better. I bring all this up because I would want you as a viewer to think, how am I trying to control everything? How am I trying to control myself? How am I trying to control other people? How am I trying to control events or the world around me? Just speaking from my own experience, the less control I try to have, usually the happier I am. I can control my thoughts, feelings, behaviors based on the events that go on around me. There's something called the Serenity Prayer. Bing! There you go. It's on the screen now. I'll give you a second to read that. The Serenity Prayer, though very basic in understanding, is hard for a lot of people to enact. How do I control myself and let myself deal with the events that happen around me, as opposed to trying to control them and make things the way I want. We may perceive the people in power, the ones who have the most control over the world, as the happiest. I would present the idea to you that they are probably among the least happy. Of course, that's for you to decide. Anyway, that's it. I hope that you got something from this. I hope that you can see for yourself how your level of happiness may be related to your level or lack thereof control in the world around you. And are you doing things in your life to control or manipulate others? You gotta ask yourself, how do you feel about that? So that's it. Thank you for tuning in. And if you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend it. The sequels, I've seen them. They don't really add much to the story. But the original one, I thought it was really good. Anyway, thank you for your time. I'll see you in the next video.